Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Vandis's Managed Network Access Control solution to learn how you can extend zero trust from the edge to the cloud. My name is Joanne Ferrara, Marketing Director at Vandis, and I'm joined today by Ryan Young, Vandis's Chief Technology Officer, who will deliver today's presentation. You have been automatically muted upon arrival to the webinar, but please submit any questions you have through the Q&A function. We are recording today's session and we'll make it available to you later today. We do have a couple of polling questions today, and the polls will appear in the chat, so please have that open on the side of your screen. And finally, I invite you to visit vandis.com/events for other events that you might be interested in. And now I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Joanne. Joanne, while I introduce myself, do you mind just putting the first poll in the chat while I talk? Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Young. For those of you that haven't met me before, I am I'm the CTO here at Vandis. I've been with the organization for about 10 years. And starting my career at Vandis, I worked in the secure edge team, helping customers with role-based access deployments on both wired and wireless networks, and specifically deploying Aruba ClearPass for customers. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I think the collaboration between Microsoft and Aruba has really taken this technology to the next level. So just looking at the polls, looks like 57% of you are using Aruba ClearPass, 28% are using NPS, and 14% are using no radius at all. So that's awesome. We'll get into why ClearPass makes the difference over all of them. So let's today's agenda. We're going to cover ClearPass, quick overview, how it works, what it does. Talk about two of my favorite integrations, but there are many others. What our offering is around managed network access control, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. So with that said, let's get started. So what is ClearPass? ClearPass is a network policy server that is it's a network policy server that is able to work on making decisions on how devices enter your network by figuring out the who, what, where, when, and why. So the big boxes at the bottom: any transport, any vendor, any device, any resource. The great thing about the way ClearPass works is it is able to make decisions on who you are as a user, what device you're connecting from. Is it a managed enterprise device? Is it BYOD? Is it jailbroken? Is it not? So we can pull in context from a ton of different places and make decisions about how it works. So for those of you out there that are using Microsoft NPS, there's really like an on or an off button. So it's kind of first match, and that's what you get. Whereas ClearPass, we're actually taking that context and walking through it. I'll walk through that a little bit in the next slide. All right, so here's how ClearPass really works from start to finish. And the reason this is a circle is because it's constantly, I'm going to go with a fancy laser pointer. So the way this works from a authentication perspective, right? We start at the top, the top thing where ClearPass is looking at from the first authentication all the way through. It's looking at the device, the profiling, the fingerprinting, whatever context it already has about the device. It makes context actions based on that, and on devices that it doesn't yet have the context, it gets that initial radius request that has a lot of that information inside of it, or captive portal request, or DHCP fingerprint, however we're steering context to the ClearPass box. And from there, it starts to make that role-based policy decision. So once it has the beginnings of its endpoint profile, then we go into the authentication. So the authentication is a pretty cool part because the saying here, one role, one network. For the most part, that's really true, right? You're no longer standing up a network for BYOD devices and a network for enterprise.1x. What we're actually able to do within ClearPass is have multiple authentication protocols running against the same service. So I can join my network with my work computer that's been deployed by Intune that has certificates, and it's going to recognize that I'm coming in with enterprise issued device certificates. The machine is compliant in Intune. I'm going to get an engineering profile within ClearPass that gives me access to the information that, or the endpoints within my network that I need to have access to. Whereas if I brought my personal phone in and connected it, I might be able to authenticate and log on, but it knows that it's not a managed device. It might be onboarded into Intune, but it's onboarded as a personal device. And ClearPass on that same .1x network is actually saying, no, this is going to be treated like a guest, put them in the guest VLAN. So the big advantage to this, right, is your BYOD traffic is still being encrypted. It's not a pre-shared key. So you have that rolling key, rolling encryption. You're protecting your BYOD devices as well as your enterprise devices from any kind of on-network sniffing that might be happening. And also the other part of it is pre-shared keys. Everyone has them. So once the pre-shared key is out there, it takes about 15 minutes for it to start to be shared. Anyone can go in and unmask, and if it's an Apple device, you can actually share the network without even really being asked. So let's get into the role-based access control, right? When a device joins, we have what's called a role mapping, where we're looking at all of the different attributes that we want to key off of. So we're looking at the device, we're looking at the time of day, we're looking at the user, we're looking at the location they're on, the SSID they're on. We're mapping all of those to different roles. And then based on the combination of those roles, we're actually executing what's called an enforcement profile, right? So the enforcement profile is what ClearPass is telling your downstream network access device, like your switch, your wireless, your firewall. It's passing that context through so that your downstream network is able to enforce that user with the rights and visibility that they require for their role. So in today's world, that's really important because with COVID and quarantine and everyone working from home, we all did a lot to secure our edge and create zero trust networking from outside the environment. But honestly, a lot of the internal networks, people kind of do it, well, if you're able to get on the network, then you're a trusted device. And that world is really starting to drastically change. And how that has drastically changed is, we've all come to see that, if a device gets into the network and it's been compromised, if you don't have a zero trust or least privilege framework as at least, then what you're doing is you're putting your internal enterprise at risk, and all the work that you did to secure your zero trust networking, remote work from home users, like popping pinholes for layer 7 VPN, all of a sudden that all goes away if your entire attack landscape is still open on the inside. So role-based access control, zero trust, really important. So then we get into the continuous monitoring, right? So even when ClearPass makes a decision, that decision is still it's not a permanent decision, right? So context can change. We're constantly getting fed context from all of the other enforcement points within the environment, whether it be EdgeConnect, the Aruba SD-WAN product, whether it be your firewalls, whether it be Intune. Anytime that context changes, we go into the whole cycle again. So let's say my work device goes from being compliant to not compliant. Immediately we go into enforcement and response, right? So this is a action-based response. Outside of the normal authentication schedule, I might get bounced and redirected to a captive portal that says your device is no longer compliant with Intune. Please become compliant. And then you start this process again. So this is a constant fabric. I think Aruba calls it like the 360 like threat. But you know, at the end of the day, all you have to know is it's always reevaluating the access that has been given to a user or an endpoint. And please, if at any point you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. All right, so navigating the shift. This diagram, this picture of a freeway, I think is like a perfect example of how complicated some of our networks have become over time. And really, for any of you that have met me or been to any of my other webinars, I really focus on simplifying your network doesn't mean creating a insecure network. Simplifying your network really means that you're able to start to get end-to-end visibility in your network with a unified approach to how you're addressing how your endpoints get on the network. So one of the things that ClearPass does is we give you that that single point for authentication and authorization, but it also unifies the user experience, whether you're on the wired or wireless. What ClearPass is able to do is actually give you perfect replication of the user's experience from wireless or the user's experience from wired. So it's no longer a question of, well, if you're on the wireless, you can't get to this resource, but if you're on the wire, you can get to everything. We're going with that. You plug into a wired port, you're getting the same authentication role-based analysis that you would on the wireless. So the other big thing that is becoming more and more of an issue for all of us is IoT. IoT, I think for a long time was a buzzword that everyone wanted to really tackle, but no one really had a true sense of how to tackle it. And I think that has come a long way in the last year and a half, 2 years. So one of the things that you can start to do with ClearPass and the integrations I mentioned, say you have an asset management database, right? And your buildings team needs to get your HVAC systems on the network. That's great. All they have to do is go into the asset management database, add the HVAC system as an asset, put in its MAC address, put in some information about what it does, classify it as IoT. When that device gets plugged into the network, ClearPass can actually read into most asset management databases or make straight SQL calls and add context from SQL databases or Postgres databases to really increase that that context. And by doing that, you no longer have the onboarding cycle of the building's plant team just plugging stuff in. I was actually with someone the other day where that was their biggest problem, is as they are expanding and renovating their offices, their building's plant management team is just plugging stuff in wherever they see an open port, and they didn't really know how to tackle that. So leveraging ClearPass, we're able to put those in a very controlled network, keep very close eyes on it, update the upstream firewalls about what it is, so that they're able to make those same applied policies. And if something changes with that device, we can very quickly knock it off the network. And finally, what we're seeing more and more is these large monolithic global networks or campus networks that are very complex. When they fail big. And simplifying the data pathways and leveraging tools like Aruba ClearPass give you the granularity to focus on securing at the access point, at the port, for your east-west, and then feeding that same context to your firewall gateways or your SD-WAN appliance to apply that same context at the edge layer. And then if you're running firewalls in the public cloud or remote data center, feeding that same context on the other side. Integrations. So this is a pretty new integration. It's actually been around for a while in just a visibility standpoint, But one of the things that Aruba has, it's in EA right now, not GA. It should be GA soon. But what it is we're now able to push that same ClearPass context into the Aruba EdgeConnect SD-WAN appliance. So if you're familiar with that, you can actually really push down to a true WAN-based or LAN-WAN-based ZTNA from inside your perimeter by pushing the roles and the enforcement to the SD-WAN appliance for the north-south traffic, right? So now we're saying, this IoT camera, this IoT camera, when it connects and it goes through and hits the EdgeConnect sees that role isn't allowed to go to any of the layer 7 applications in the data center. It's only allowed to go to the internet. Whereas maybe this credit card reader needs to get to a SAP database in Azure. So it's going to hit the EdgeConnect. It's going to see there's a role that gives it the layer 7 access to that appliance. So we're really removing those like giant monolithic IPv4 ACLs, the stateless ACLs, and moving towards a more dynamic unified fabric that is being pushed on a device-by-device control layer, so that you're not making a policy decision for every port, every VLAN. Instead, we're just pushing down to the port or the access point that that device is connected to. All right, the other one, which I think is important, and I love this integration, but there are other MDMs that are out there. I've seen a huge uptick in adoption of Microsoft Intune, so I wanted to call it out here. So one of the great things that ClearPass can do is it has over 150 third-party integrations, and it uses any of those integrations as context. And if you don't have a supported integration, but you have your own platform, you can actually write API calls or have it query the SQL database directly to pull that information into its own Postgres database. So in this scenario, right, ClearPass is able to actually tie into Microsoft Intune and pull the full context of the device. What's its compliance level at? Is it compliant? Any of the attributes that exist within Intune, you're able to actually pull in and make decisions on. So is it corporate? Is it personal? And all of this helps you as you're making policy decisions based on your network. It also helps to deploy things like certificates. If you're not using certificates today, I highly recommend you do so. It will not only help secure your environment, it will also help you with it will help reduce your help desk tickets. What we have seen is customers are often overwhelmed by the concept of certificates, but once we get a PKI infrastructure deployed for them and get them up and running, their help desk tickets drop through the floor because now they don't have problems with end users' passwords expiring. Can be a real big problem, specifically on like OS X, iOS, and Android. Windows managed devices, not really a problem. They're intelligent enough to change that up. But when you go to certificate-based authentication, you're getting rid of the password. So as passwords change, it doesn't matter because the user is authenticating with the certificate, not with their username and password. But again, if any of the context changes here, Intune can inform ClearPass. ClearPass can execute a mid-session enforcement action to notify them that they are out of compliance and need to get back into compliance. All right, so let's get into why we're all here today. Manage network access control by Vandis. So about a year and a half ago, Aruba launched ClearPass as a as a supported platform in Azure. And this was particularly exciting to me because, we're, Joanne, you want to release the second poll and then, sorry, jumping ahead. So, so one of the one of the great things that Microsoft did about 3 years ago was release Azure Virtual WAN, and Azure Virtual WAN is an important piece of this because historically, a lot of enterprises, companies have had a hybrid cloud in Azure, but all of that infrastructure was kind of doing the trombone through a data center. So the edge environment wasn't directly connecting to it. With the combination of Aruba ClearPass, Microsoft Virtual WAN, Silver Peak, if you have it, you're able to kind of change the way you're looking at things. So up top here, this is I hear it all the time, is we are migrated to Azure, but we have to maintain some physical presence for things like ClearPass. And I kid you not, I hear this all the time. And what that really comes down to is ClearPass has always been these like giant VMs or heavy metal that exist in our data centers. And the problem with colos or terrestrial data centers that you lease or own is that physical presence can only be expanded so far. So one of the things that we have seen is, this reference on the right here is a sample of a customer deployment where they have ClearPass nodes in North America, they have ClearPass nodes in Europe, they have ClearPass nodes in Asia. There's a lot of latency that comes with a distributed environment like this, especially when the legacy MPLS infrastructure really was a backhaul to the data center approach. So putting ClearPass in Azure in this kind of architecture where you're backhauling to a data center and then up to ClearPass, it really makes no sense at all. And the other area where you see a lot of help desk tickets come from is actually latency to ClearPass. Radius is an old protocol. It's a little bit finicky in terms of delays. Like, yeah, you can play with the timeouts, but or the Radius timer timeouts. But at the same time, like you want your end users to have a fast, efficient authentication experience, and you really start to see that drop in like Wi-Fi doesn't work. The number of times I've heard Wi-Fi doesn't work, and it's actually related to long haul radius authentications timing out. I can't even tell you how many times. But the last one really focuses around these complex BGP enterprise networks that exist, where you're oftentimes like routing into an MPLS black hole, or you're in a hub and spoke architecture where you're going over public IPsec tunnels to like hub concentrators that then connect to other data centers in a like hub-to-hub configuration. All of these don't really scale from a large distributed environment. So why is ClearPass in Azure so important, right? All of a sudden you went from having 3 dots on the screen where you can have ClearPass to being able to run it anywhere, bring it closer to your branch edge. So what really changes the game here is most of the time when you're leveraging Azure Virtual WAN and Aruba ClearPass, instead of having multiple hops to get to Azure, you're actually really only looking at an IPsec tunnel or a proprietary tunnel from whatever SD-WAN appliance you're running to Azure. You're only hopping essentially to your closest peering point, which historically for most populated areas, you're not even leaving your ISP. You're hitting a peering point within the ISP, and then you're into Azure's fiber network, which is the second largest in the world. So you're essentially bringing ClearPass right up to the branch edge for everyone. So what does that do? That reduces timeouts. That also gives your users a faster user experience. So here's a sample architecture I put together just for this. But essentially, say today you have ClearPass running in your corporate data center. What we can actually deploy for you is a as many regions as you need, depending on where you are. I mean, if you're a global enterprise where you're literally in every continent, my minimum recommendation is always four Azure regions: Asia, US, Europe, and Latin America. Latin America being an interesting one because we have seen the majority of their latency be the equivalent of coming from Asia to the US. Very latent, very unstable. So leveraging virtual WAN to create that hub to hub, you're running over a massive low latency fiber network, but all of your branch sites are also connecting directly to the CDN edge of Microsoft, which is often, like I said, inside your ISP peering point. So by going with this architecture, say you have your legacy ClearPass environment, you don't have to shut it down and move it. You can actually add these ClearPass VMs as members of the cluster, and then start to point regional nodes at these environments. And you see a dramatic drop in latency, right? You're going from the 3 slides ago, we're looking at going from say even India to China, India to Hong Kong, about 130 milliseconds. Going to the US, you could be looking upwards of 200 easily. So being able to distribute across the globe really gives you the ability to very quickly authenticate and very quickly support your organization. Now, where Vandis comes in from a management standpoint, if you have this ClearPass environment on-prem, great. We work to help you migrate it up and get these clusters going across the globe. We build the connectivity, and then leveraging Microsoft's Lighthouse program, which is their managed service provider program. We are actually able to have role-based access to the resource group that this lives in, so that we're able to troubleshoot any connectivity issues that happens in virtual WAN or with your premise, as well as with the VMs themselves. And you're not giving us full access to your environment. You're giving us access just to the resource group that we're helping you manage on a day-to-day process. We do a lot of ClearPass. We've been deploying ClearPass since 2012. We lost count of how many deployments we did about 5 years ago, but we were at easily 250, and we still do about I'd say 2 to 3 a month. So we know ClearPass intimately, and we know how to tune it and how to make it work for your environment. And that's really why we got so excited about ClearPass in Azure. Is we can really, this is the last step. This is where we've always had the problem with global customers, is that cluster sync replication, as well as dealing with radius timeouts. And going with a distributed model, even if you're in the US using US East and US West, you're giving that redundancy and coverage to your organization. All right, so I love this video. Big shout out to Joanne, who's on the call. This video is fantastic, and I think it does a great job kind of explaining what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we do it. So I'm going to play this real quick, and then after that, I'll open it up for Q&A.
With employees accessing the network using a plethora of different devices and the expansion of unknown IoT devices, networks are facing increased vulnerability. Luckily, Vandis's managed network access control solution is here to provide your business with the unmatched security and authentication benefits of Aruba ClearPass, combined with Microsoft Azure's global network for fast and reliable network access. Aruba ClearPass gives you full visibility into every device that accesses your network, and the flexibility to define and control access by user, device, or policy. Vandis's managed NAC for Microsoft Azure lets you reduce reliance on physical data center appliances and unify policy management in the cloud. You can also distribute these security policies to each local Azure region for faster authentication and authorization, decreasing network traffic dedicated to network access, and ultimately delivering a better user experience. With authentication timeouts and cluster synchronization issues eradicated, you'll have happier users and less IT support tickets. So whether you're seeking a new solution or have an existing NAC configuration, our experts will review, optimize, and implement your policies into the Azure cloud environment. All of this is deployed and backed by our world-class managed services and ongoing support. To modernize and optimize your NAC, contact Vandis today